Well, we're back for day 6, and we're in Proverbs chapter 6, so let's get right into this. In Proverbs 6, we deal with warnings that come from Solomon to his son and to anyone who will read this, so it's a warning to us as well, about 5 different things. So there's 5 topics we're going to cover in Proverbs 6, and the first topic is in the first 5 verses, and it's warnings of a financial nature. There's lots of financial warnings in Proverbs, but this is a specific financial nature. It's about debt, but not just any kind of debt. It's a special kind of debt. So let's look at it together. Proverbs 6:1. My son, if you've put up security for your neighbor, have given pledge for a stranger, if you're snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself, for you've come into the hand of your neighbor. Go, hasten, plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep, and your eyelids no slumber. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. So, what kind of debt are we talking about here? This is the kind of debt, and all wisdom is needed for all financial matters, all of them, from how we make our money to how we spend our money to how we save our money to should I go into debt for things? And in this case, it's not a matter of going into debt for yourself even. This is a special kind of debt where you're putting up security for somebody else. You're saying, I will promise that guy will pay. And that's dangerous, especially when it's somebody who's not close to you, especially when it's somebody who you don't know well. And sometimes even if you do know well, a lot of wisdom is needed before you would do something like this. Now, these aren't necessarily commands, right? This isn't the Torah. This isn't the 10 Commandments where it says, thou shalt not put up security for your neighbor. What he's saying here is, be wise in this sort of thing. It is unwise, for one, to put up security for your neighbor, to co-sign on loans that are not your own. And it says it's such a bad idea that he says in here, if you've done this, try to get out of it as quick as you can, right? It's better not to do it in the first place, but if you have done it, go and you say, I've made a terrible mistake, and how do I get out of this? Because if you're in that type of a situation, you're like a bird in the hand of the fowler. A fowler is somebody who would catch the bird. And he says, so this is urgent. Go, give your eyes no sleep, your eyelids no slumber, is what it says in verse 4. Don't rest until you get out of a situation like this. So that's warning number 1 about going into debt for somebody else. Warning number 2 is found in verses 6 to 11. Let's look at them together. And these are warnings about laziness, something that we all wrestle with from time to time. So verse 6, go to the ant, O sluggard. Sluggard's just a lazy person. Consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, there's nobody there telling an ant, do this, do that, what to do, to-do lists or anything else. But yet, even an ant with a tiny little brain and no boss, verse 8 says, she prepares her bread in summer and she gathers her food in harvest. In other words, she's planning for her future, and she's industrious, and she's doing things that matter for herself. And then in contrast, verse 9, how long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? And this is what a sluggard tends to say, a lazy person tends to say in verse 10, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. So we see here in these verses, laziness leads to want. Laziness leads to poverty. And even an ant with its tiny little brain knows what to do without somebody having to tell it what to do. So in our case, we say, be industrious, work hard, don't be lazy. Laziness is a big problem, and we'll see more of this in the book of Proverbs as well. So debt, laziness. Here's the third thing that's a warning in chapter 6, and this is about strife. It's about personal interactions with other people. Discord is how it's worded here. Look at it's verse 12 to 15. It says, a worthless person, a wicked man, what do? They go about with crooked speech, and he winks with his eyes, and he signals with his feet, and he points with his finger. And with a perverted heart, he devises evil. And get this, pay attention, end of verse 14. He's continually sowing discord. Discord is just strife and argumentativeness and refusing to get along with people. In Romans, Paul writes, and he says, as much as it depends upon you, live at peace with people. And this is a person who's doing the exact opposite, continually sowing discord. In verse 15, here's the results when you live a lifestyle like that. Therefore, calamity will come upon him suddenly, and in a moment he will be broken, and not just broken beyond healing. And many of us know people who have been in relationships that have been broken beyond healing. And it shouldn't be that way. We're called to be ministers of reconciliation, but sometimes because we've wound up sowing discord, we wind up breaking relationships, as it says here, beyond healing. And that's sad. Here's the fourth warning from verses 16 to 19. And these are 7 that the Lord hates. Ready? Verse 16. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him. Here they are. Ready? Number 1, haughty eyes. Haughty is not a word we use often, but it's just, people who are blatant and very disdainfully proud. They look down on other people. Haughty eyes. 2, a lying tongue. 3, hands that shed innocent blood. Next one is a heart that devises wicked plans. Then feet that make haste to run to evil. That's why we have to think before we act. We're not just quick to run and do things, but we want to think before we act, and don't make haste to run to evil. Here's the last 2. A false witness who breathes out lies. And here we go again, one who sows discord among brothers, people who are stirring up strife. 7 things that are an abomination to the Lord. He hates these things. And I pray that we wouldn't be involved in any of those sorts of things that we see, those 7 things in those verses. And then finally, the last 15 verses of this chapter, and we're going to read through it quickly because it's a topic we touched on in chapter 5, which is warnings against adultery. Now, it's a little different because in chapter 5 was warnings against the adulteress, the woman who talks smooth and is seductive. And in this case, it's warnings against adultery. And we're going to see in these last 15 verses some of the danger that comes from this. So read through with me here. Verse 20. My son, keep your father's commandment. Forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart. How often? Always. Tie them around your neck. Keep it with you at all times is what he's saying here. Verse 22. When you walk, they'll lead you. When you lie down, they'll watch over you. When you awake, they will talk with you. In other words, what he's saying here is you have to watch out for this all day long. When you're walking, when you're lying down, when you're awake, you have to constantly be on guard against this. Verse 23, for the commandment is a lamp and the teaching is a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way of life. God's word and the wisdom that comes in God's word helps me to see where I'm going. That's what it means when it's a lamp and a teaching is a light. Why? Verse 24, to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Do not desire her beauty in your heart. Do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. For the price of a prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life. In other words, for verse 26 is saying, is we may think like, it doesn't cost anything, it's cheap, it doesn't really mean anything, and we hear this, it doesn't really mean anything. It's just like a cost of a loaf of bread. But what they're saying here, what Solomon's saying here is that it's costlier than you realize. It's precious, and it destroys lives. Here's a question, and when I'm done asking this question, you say the answer. Verse 27, can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes not be burned? And the answer, of course, is no. I hope you said that. I have it in my Bible. It's written in big letters, and I have an exclamation point next to it. And just like you can't carry fire and not be burned, you can't commit adultery and infidelity and not have pain and suffering come out of it. You will get burned every time. Verse 28. Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not get scorched? Again, the answer is no. So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. God sees. Remember, we talked about that in chapter 5. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his appetite when he's hungry, but if he's caught, he'll pay sevenfold, and he'll give all the goods of his house. And he who commits adultery just lacks sense, and he who does it destroys himself, and he'll get wounds and dishonor, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. For jealousy makes a man furious, and he will not spare when he takes revenge. There's a lot of different consequences to adultery and to infidelity. And he will accept no compensation. He will refuse, though you multiply gifts. Sometimes we try to talk our way out of things when we're stuck in a bad decision that we've made. And there's no talking your way out of adultery and infidelity. Why go through this again? We just talked about it last chapter because it's a huge problem, and it's a devastating problem. And that's why Solomon writes so much about it, and we're going to read some more about it in future days as well. But I pray that these things that we've talked about, these warnings, I pray you'll heed those warnings in your life and live a life of wisdom today. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.